What's the number one mistake SEOs make when it comes to CRO?
The number one mistake, in my opinion, SEO is just going to hand over the traffic and it's CRO's job to convert it.
How do you know which keyword will hit on what?
There's definitely a relationship between SEO and SEM. As we start to look at those areas, then we can say, here are the keywords that are focusing on at which tier in a customer journey and where does that make sense?
Should it not be a multi-channel approach rather than just SEO and CRO?
From awareness to consideration can be a long lead time. It's about creating social trust and social currency around some of those areas. 60% of searches are not resulting in a click. It's a zero-click issue.
So how do you do proper keyword optimization then?
I really love to do is look at a keyword ecosystem and prioritizing your effort and energy on
what's a high quality traffic for SEOs?
As simple as possible and removing as much friction as possible so that you can get that lead into the pipeline.
What could be the reason behind this?
Running the effective test really comes down to having a really good roadmap. The fastest results tests that you can get are going to be.
Welcome to SEO Gurus. In today's episode, we welcome Laura Nguyen. Laura is an award-winning experienced marketing executive and entrepreneur with an extensive background in data-driven marketing, digital marketing, and communications for Fortune 500 companies. She is the founder of Solle Solutions, a marketing consultancy. Laura is also a certified executive coach, helping mid-career, high-achieving leaders go from burned out to balance through her coaching program and online community. This episode is brought to you by GHA Marketing, and we hope you'll enjoy our conversation with Laura.
So, Laura, you've written a fantastic article on Search Engine Land talking about SEO, and CRO. And I'd like to deep dive into this. So, maybe to begin with, what is CRO even?
Awesome. Well, Kim, I think a couple things, which is, one, did you only read the article because I mentioned Bridgerton?
That's true, but I'm going to assume the audience didn't. That's my excuse.
The content is really key, right? So let's talk a little bit about SEO and CRO. One of the things I talk about in the article is the marriage between SEO and CRO and this joking kind of play between the courting process between the two. And so when we think about SEO and being that this is, an SEO audience, really when we think about SEO, it's about how does SEO drive high quality traffic, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, SEO drives high quality traffic, and that is the goal and the intention around SEO. The goal and intention around CRO is to take that traffic and focus on how do we convert that traffic into leads and ultimately sales. The end goal for both CRO and SEO, and honestly, organizationally and for a domain owner, is how do we convert and generate revenue from the leads that we generate from the traffic we get? And so, it's intended to be a happy marriage between the two, where there's a balancing act between generating really quality traffic that then ultimately converts, so that ultimately all the goals for the organization and for the domain owners, right, are being met.
So when you say the goal of SEO is to drive high quality traffic, but then can we stop a second on the definition of this? Because when I think about high quality traffic, I'm just like, it's a traffic that's going to convert eventually. But then you make the difference with what CRO should optimize for once they get this high quality traffic. So what's the difference here? Maybe to begin with, what's a high quality traffic for SEOs? What does it mean?
Yeah, that's a great question. We think about it as what's the customer journey, right? So someone's coming to your site to understand more about a product or service that you're offering. And so depending on where they are, there's a different intent level for that consumer, right? They might just be in an early stage. They're just learning and understanding. Is this something that they even need? Is there an intent more based on, okay, they know they need to buy this product, but they need to understand what their options are. They have more questions before they're making a purchasing decision. And then there's folks who are lower down the funnel, which is they likely have done all of this research, right? And now they're ready to hit go and buy. And those are, when we think about high quality traffic, it's about understanding what kind of three prongs in that customer journey are you hitting, so that way you can make sure you're meeting the needs of each of those audiences and answering their questions appropriately and converting them at the right time. And that's part of where CRO and SEO play a really nice balancing act. Is if SEO is focusing on, let's say, the top tier prong of people who are doing research, then it's really about content. It's informational content, it's likely pricing content, it's comparative content, those types of things. If someone is making those kind of like mid-tier decisions, right, then you want to take a look at how do you start to find the balance between shifting them from a consideration point to shifting them into understanding why your product is differentiated from others. And then finally, once you're hitting the go button in terms of generating that lead, it's about making that lead process, that lead capture process, as simple as possible and removing as much friction as possible so that you can get that lead into the pipeline.
So there is a lot to unpack here. When it comes to intent level, to begin with, how do you even know which keyword is hitting on which step of the customer's journey? Because then I guess we're going to talk about the whole keyword optimization, page building, what you put out as content. But as an SEO, when you're like, okay, I need to capture this, and this type of people for this, and this step of the customer's journey, how do you know which keyword will hit on what?
Yeah, it's a great question. And a lot of it comes out of data, right? So like looking at GA4 and looking at Search Console and understanding how someone comes into your what pages, what are those pages looking like from a dwell time perspective, right? And also from a lead capture perspective. What are the pages they're visiting before they enter high conversion point pages, after conversion point pages? Just trying to understand and map out what is that customer journey on your site and what were the keywords that were leading them into the pages. The other area that I really love to take a look at as well is, there's definitely a relationship between SEO and SEM. So from a PPC perspective, and understanding what are the keywords that are driving from a PPC perspective onto the site and how are those converting, and using both of that to create your keyword ecosystem of understanding what's paid and what's rented, right? Paid and rented properties, which is PPC, versus what's owned, which is regenerating them from an organic perspective. And as we start to look at those areas, then we can say, here are the keywords that are focusing on at which tier in a customer journey, and where does that make sense?
Let me throw you a curveball here, because you mentioned SEM, so now I have to go into this. When you look at the customer's journey, isn't it something that actually we should look from a multi-channel perspective? And when I'm saying this, I'm thinking, like, I'm taking my own example. When I have a problem that I'm just finding out about, so I'm becoming conscious of my problem, I'm going to do a Google search, right? But then what I'm typically going to do is to watch some videos on YouTube on either how to solve that problem or what people typically do when they have this problem. Then I'll potentially, for the few people that I see as being potentially the solution provider for this, I'm going to check them out on Instagram, typically. Like, what do they put out there? And eventually, when I'm thinking about the things that I've purchased, I end up on the website, the landing page to buy. But then if we are so, regarding and demanding, which we should, at the level in which the potential customer is at in the customer's journey, should it not be a multi-channel approach rather than just SEO and CRO?
100%. Yes, 100%. And to your point around the customer journey, that consideration pathway, right, from awareness to consideration can be a long lead time. And so to your point around understanding, how do we make sure that we're focusing really on, we've got the data throughput from a GA4 perspective, which is by the time they're on your site. But really understanding what's happening even before that is so key and critical. And a lot of that, at the end of the day, comes down to a lot of brand marketing, right? It's about creating social trust and social currency around some of those areas, because that's your reputation that you're trying to build a brand around. And so to your point around, when you think about searches that are happening, like TikTok searches, right, have skyrocketed. And so when you think about, and then from an AI perspective, the number of AI results we're getting, right, from a results perspective. The other component around that, which we talked a little bit before we started this, which is the level of the number of people who are, searching for content and the resulting clicks that are coming from their searches. So I think there was a recent data study from SparkToro that said 60% of searches are not resulting in a click. It's a 0-click issue. And so more and more people are looking for content and information. And then as a part of their consideration process are flowing down that, the funnel of becoming leads and ultimately sales for you. And so investing and really looking at what's the entire ecosystem for an omni-channel approach really becomes necessary, because what happens is if you look at a last touch model, you're only giving credit to the last channel they converted on. But what we're not looking at is how long did it take for them to get there? And what were the other channels that help influence their buying decision?
I love this. Okay. So with that being said, how do you make sure as an SEO, when you try to optimize for this high quality traffic, But you also need to bear in mind the last piece of the funnel, which is the conversion. How do you prioritize pages? How do you take the right actions? What typically needs to be true to make sure that we have a successful marriage between SEO and CRO, and it doesn't go to pick your word here?
Yeah. So I mean, I feel like at first it comes down to really understanding the data, coming from a performance marketing background, and really so many SEOs are so data driven, right? Like we're so dependent on data to be successful. And so taking a look at the data and understanding at a per page level, what's generating traffic and volume for you, and then also understanding what's generating conversions for you. So there's a few ways that I typically like to look at it, which is if I take all of the URLs, every single page within the site, I want to do an export of understanding, that from a columns perspective, what's generating that traffic and then ultimately what's generating that conversion. But then I like to categorize those pages. So once we categorize the pages based on what's informational, right? What is generating, what's a pricing that has a lower intent piece. So you kind of categorize it based on where are they in the customer journey? Mm-hmm. And then trying to understand how much SEO traffic is coming into those pages versus direct or paid, and trying to isolate each of those, and then doing the math, right, between lead conversion, by type, by URL, by intent. And that gives us a really granular view of where we can focus our effort and energy. So for example, across a lot of the clients, and even when I was on the brand side, we generate a ton of traffic on, say, blogs. Blogs are a awareness, typically driven platform, right, in terms of where we're at in driving traffic. Those pages typically don't convert. Can you increase and include conversion points on a blog page? Yes. But that is not the intention of someone coming to the site. And so if an expectation is for a blog to generate leads, that expectation is inaccurate because that's not where they're at in their customer journey. So what we really need to focus on is focusing on what are the pages that are going to help generate leads and conversions as a CRO effort. That's the marriage between the two. And also focusing on, right, higher domain authority, generating quality traffic to pages to also generate awareness and consideration for the products too. So it's a balancing act between both CRO and SEO.
That makes a lot of sense. Another question comes to my mind, as in what can we do as SEOs to eventually drive more high quality traffic and converting our customers? From your experience, is search on a search engine similar to a TikTok search? Meaning, if I'm getting very good at optimizing, understanding what people look for, what intention they have behind each keyword, and I'm assuming that it's going to be pretty much the same search on TikTok, and I just not then look at another channel and say, hey, I'm going to optimize exactly the same way, that I just need to align with my social media team, obviously. But are there some synergies here as well, or is the way people look for stuff on TikTok completely different than the way they look for stuff on Google or any other search engine?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because the same thing goes with YouTube Shorts versus TikTok, right?
True.
Or even Instagram. And so when you're looking at video form content versus text form content, I think there is a different need because also your consumer base could potentially be different. And so are there learnings that we can leverage between video platforms versus a text-based platform? Yes, for sure, right? But someone that might be consuming your text-based content is likely going to have probably a different level of intent. And they might just be holistically different audiences. And we just have to make sure that we're running experiments to understand that. My whole focus is so much on let's see how it works. Let's test it and see how it works. And some of it is, understanding what's the content that you're creating on a short form video versus the content you're creating potentially on a long form text content. But the truth is that it's about how we answer the question. And that's really what people are searching for is how are we answering the question that they're asking in the most succinct way? And video has done a really good job of doing that because now you've got, from a closed caption perspective, we have text that accompanies so much video. Yeah. And you're saying, what are the top 3 highlights I need to know in a 60-second video versus reading your 3-minute long form piece of content that, I'm just skimming through is the reality of the situation.
So I like that. And I also like that it probably shows indeed a different level of intention because you might not remember everything the same if you're watching a 60-second clip, let alone 30-second clip, versus like taking the 5 minutes it takes to go through your article in depth and like consuming it as the only thing that you can consume and not scrolling down. So I like this concept. We've touched upon it. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say too, that piece that you were just mentioning, which is based on where they're at in the customer journey, right? Is that if they are in the consideration piece and they become a lead from, say, a higher intent video where they're consuming short form content, they haven't done the full deep dive of understanding your product. There's likely a longer sales process to that, which means your follow-up, you're chasing a lead versus having the lead essentially come to you. And that means on a sales side, how we approach providing content, information, and context to a consumer is different than if they are, right, looking at some of this longer form pieces that they've done tons of research on. They have all of this data and this input, and now they're just ready to buy. They're at different stages in the journey.
Love that. I think we already touched upon it quickly, but I'd like to deep dive a little bit into that. So how do you do proper keyword optimization then when it comes to SEO versus when it comes to CRO versus when it comes to ideally both? How do you typically look at this, Laura?
Yeah, what I really love to do is look at a keyword ecosystem. And so when we look at a keyword ecosystem, right, we're looking at it both from, what's a broad match, phrase match kind of approach, as well as any long-term, long tail type of keywords. And so I think all of these areas all kind of flow into what's your keyword ecosystem. And that ecosystem looks at what's from a PPC perspective, from an SEM perspective, as well as from an organic perspective. And also, what are the priority keywords based on the level of intent that we talked about before, right? So you have now likely this massive Excel sheet or Google sheet that has like all of your URLs, all of the keywords that are driving traffic there, what the traffic looks like, what your percentage share is of the volume of that traffic is the other piece, because you want to think about opportunity size. And then you're looking at conversion, right? Now you're looking at leads that are generated on a per URL basis. And we run those pivots to understand, okay, here's the keywords that are generating your ultimate leads. Here are the keywords that are generating, say, medium scale leads that are going to require us to chase them a bit. And here are the keywords that are looking at more of an awareness kind of piece. And each of those we categorize and we kind of go through a process, right, of going, how do I focus on the right terms and make decisions on the right terms at the right time in the buyer cycle? And so as an SEO, we're looking at each of those, right? You want to look at the marriage between each of those kind of 3 stages of that funnel. And, there's typically longer nuances to it as well. And prioritizing your effort and energy on what's going to generate the balance between traffic versus conversion.
What's the number one mistake SEOs make when it comes to CRO then? What are we all overlooking or maybe not paying too much attention to? What's the number one mistake in your opinion?
Yeah, the number one mistake, in my opinion, that SEOs and CROs make is that we're mutually exclusive, right? Like at the end of the day, that it's a handoff, that it's basically like, here's SEO is just going to hand over the traffic and it's CRO's job to convert it, right? And it's the same thing we hear about from marketing and sales, right? It is about a marriage, because what we have to focus on is how do we together make sure that we're generating high quality traffic that will ultimately convert into leads. And those leads are converting into quality sales. And the end result collectively is recognizing that we all want to generate revenue for our organizations. And how we do that means that we have to work together. So we can't function in a silo. We have to work together, and getting to the table together as often as possible is key.
You touched upon it quickly earlier, the zero-click searches topic. I'm interested into this because as I'm learning more and more about SERP, I was an SEO. I was looking at those little hrefs kind of information that you can get. And you have these SERP results. And then you have like 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 kind of like features. And I was like, what the heck is that? But then in SERP, you have like either links towards pages, right? But now you also have people also ask. And like you have kind of questions that people ask. So you can see the results of those. You have the little excerpts on the right if you're looking for a company. Now you also have videos depending on the topic. You also have pictures of products if you're Googling for products. So you can have tons and tons of search engine results pages and different features. First of all, why do you think more than half of the searches end up in zero click? Like, what could be the reason behind this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's fascinating to me, right? Like the research data just came out, and one of the things that I've just recognized, right, is this movement to zero click has been an ongoing movement for several years once we started really rolling out an increase in feature snippets. Mm-hmm. And anytime I join an organization, any clients that I work with, and even for my own personal brand, it's very much about how do we dominate SERP? That really becomes the key objective, is how do we dominate SERP and diversify our ability to dominate SERP, right? Yeah. And so that means being in map pack so that you can show up as a part of a listings result. And listings results have a high opportunity to not only generate traffic, but the key is if you can generate leads from a click to call, then your ability to generate those leads, those are high intent, those are low intent leads, meaning like they are very interested in converting. They're lower in the funnel. And we have the ability then to get them on the phone. So you're not chasing a lead, you're letting the lead come to you. So MapPack has a really key opportunity for us to capture that. Your other component around shopping, images, videos, frequent, people also ask. All of these types of questions where content becomes the key to answer those is an opportunity for us to understand what makes sense for us to show up in those featured snippets. What answers do we actually want to make sure maybe don't generate the click volume to generate that click over to the site. But then the next piece is how do you make sure now you're in position 1, 2, and 3? Right. And that's really the key, is how do you look at the entire ecosystem, what's in SERP, and recognizing that there might be areas that someone is not going to click. If 60% of traffic is not clicking, they're looking for an answer and they found that answer. Now the key is to go, is the answer they're looking for, right? Is the question they're asking and the answer they're looking for something that's going to be high quality traffic leads anyways? So if they are purely shopping, what you're losing in this world is those awareness, that top funnel people who are getting the answer that they need. And now the next question becomes, how do you continue to build a relationship with those people so that when they start moving down the funnel, they're clicking on your content because you're ever present? So that's to our point earlier around this whole ecosystem, right? Around this whole omni-channel approach is about being present as a part of that omni-channel approach to engage that consumer.
Okay. And then like a follow-up question on this. Hey, if you're still listening to this, you probably find this conversation interesting, and that means that others might too. So the best way you can support this podcast for free is to leave us a 5-star review wherever you're listening to this show. This helps the podcast more than I could say. It means other SEOs can learn and get access to our amazing guests, and that will mean the world to me. All right, with that being said, back to the episode. When you learn about SEO, which is what I'm still doing, you understand that you can only be very good at a few keywords. You cannot spread yourself too thin. Otherwise, you're not going to get at the top of the results and you're not going to get traffic. If I understand properly what you're saying here, Laura, is that I should make sure that eventually I rank for all the keywords of my ideal customer's journey. Meaning when they are first going to do a research, which is potentially going to end up in being a zero-click search. But then when they are a little bit further down, they start looking for information, dig a little bit deeper into this, they will eventually click, but I need to rank on those keywords as well. And then when there is purchase intent, I need to make sure I rank for this as well. Isn't it a never-ending game then, that you can not properly rank for all the keywords, and you might rank very well at the top of the funnel ones, but not the end of the funnel ones, or vice versa, but then you're not getting enough traffic? How do you balance all this?
Yeah, great question. So it goes back to when you think about this massive Excel sheet we talked about earlier, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you're looking at that, one of the key things to understand is kind of a balancing act between the keyword that has the highest potential volume for you, that is relevant to your specific business, right? And so when you take that keyword then, and then you can apply that to what's the conversion throughput to be in position 1. So typically what you look at, let's say that, one of your keywords generates 60,000 searches a month on a monthly basis. And for you, you're in position 5. So you're on page 1, but you're lower on the page. And so if you can look at and identify what would it take for me to go from position 5 to position 2, and how does that then equate to increasing my click-through rate? Because now I'm in position 2. And let's say my click-through rate on position 2 is, let's say 10%, right? Mm-hmm. So in that situation, if it's a 10% click-through rate on a 60,000 volume, right, per month, from a per month search volume perspective, then you can take that and say, okay, 60,000, right, I can get, or 600 visitors per month purely from this keyword that are driving to this specific page. And you just start working through the math of understanding how can I generate the right volume from the right opportunity size that's going to generate traffic to my site. And then you're balancing act between this never-ending game. It's all about prioritization. Anything that we work on, right, is all about prioritization. We can't do all things well, but what we have to focus on is when you look at that keyword ecosystem, having a primary, secondary, and tertiary prioritization on what are the keywords you should focus on is really, really helpful. And what I tend to like to do, especially if you are, let's say, leaking leads or in a lead shortage situation, the key is to focus on your top priority keywords first. Make sure that you stop the leaky bucket by focusing on the right pages that are generating the leads and the revenue for you, that you're moving those as high as you can in top positions, and then slowly start chipping away at the secondary, the tertiary keywords, and things will shift. Algorithms change, right? Competitors will start to get aggressive, but it's about making sure you have a really clear crystal lens on here are the keywords that are high priority for the business, and that you're continuing to monitor and measure those.
So you obviously already hinted on it, but let's say I'm an SEO that is seeing my traffic going up, but my leads going down. How do you typically, become aware of this situation? I guess it's pretty obvious, right? You're going to have the sales department calling you and say, hey, what the heck is happening? But how do you typically investigate when something is going wrong like this? Like, how do you become aware and be like, okay, let's get down to the bottom of this and understand what's going wrong to understand what I should be putting my focus on? How do that typically happen?
Yeah. So these are my, unfortunately, my favorite problems to like dig into and solve, because it's one of those where there's a situation that is unanswered, right? You're like, why am I generating traffic, but that traffic isn't converting? Mm-hmm. I did my job. SEOs are saying I did my job in generating the traffic. Now we got to figure out how and why those leads are not converting in the right way. And what it comes down to is not just looking at it, like we'll start at a micro level view, right? Which is pulling data week over week, month over month, year over year, and understanding what's the organic traffic volume, what pages that volume of organic traffic came from on a comparative level, where we might have dropped off and what that looks like. If there were changes to the website from a technical perspective. So I typically go through this like checklist in my mind, right? Of, here's the first thing we want to take a look at is what's happening in GA4. What are the pages that are generating traffic month over month, year over year? What does that look like from an organic perspective, a direct perspective, and a paid perspective? Mm-hmm. Then the next level becomes, okay, if all things are equal and the traffic has continued to see an increase, but there's not an answer for why those leads are not converting. The next piece kind of goes down to our technical perspective. So from a technical perspective, was there anything that changed? Did we make any changes on the lead form? Did we make any changes on how we capture phone calls as a lead intake? Was there an algorithm change and now our site speed is super slow? So it actually takes, 10 seconds to load, which is then driving an issue for conversions. All of these questions are to come in from a technical perspective. The last piece becomes, okay, what is happening on a sales perspective and understanding what are the conversations that are happening in sales? Is the content driving, let's say, higher, right? Folks who are higher in the funnel and they're not ready to buy. And so potentially that becomes a question of how do we nurture those leads differently because they're different types of leads, right? So they might have a longer lead time cycle. So all of these kind of ingredients come together to help us understand, is there something about how we're generating traffic to drive people to the website? Is there something on the website that is ultimately broken? And what's the throughput from the connection from that lead becoming a sales opportunity for us to be able to understand how and if that has shifted? It's a collaborative effort. Like, everyone has to work together to try to figure out, how do we solve for this issue?
What if it's just my sales team that is not good enough? How will I be able to make the difference between, hey, you guys are just terrible sales, and hey, no, actually there is a problem here?
Yeah, and it's a point, and that's a downside, right? In organizations where there's pointing fingers of you're just giving me crap leads. And I've worked in organizations where our dependency from marketing and sales is so hyper dependent on each other that I would have weekly meetings with sales leaders and say, here's the campaigns, tell me how they're converting, let's figure out how things can be better. I'm running an experiment that might lead to lower converting sales, but I want to try to generate volume. And so let's monitor that together. It's all about this collaborative experience between the teams to be successful, because in order for us to grow, we have to experiment. And it's okay for us to be able to fail at some of our initiatives, but we have to do it holding hands and saying, okay, we're going to run this for 6 weeks, 6, 10, 12 weeks, whatever the kind of defining milestones are. And let's work together to understand how we can continue to make tweaks to improve conversion rates from a throughput perspective.
Well, Laura, I understand why this is your favorite problem to solve. It sounds like fun. Can you share with us some case studies then? How have you typically solved, well, let's say, investigated this type of problems for clients of yours? Like, we understand how you typically approach this, but can you give us some real life example of what you did and what happened then?
Yeah. It's a great question. So a couple things, I'll kind of share from like past lives, and I'll anonymize it just for privacy of my confidentiality of my clients. But so let's say, for example, I have a client, right, who was really struggling with, they had multiple websites. They were on different subdomains for their sites, and trying to understand how they were generating, why their leads were down when they, in fact, were generating ultimately flat organic lead volume, right? Flat organic traffic. And so year over year, month over month, there was flat traffic, but their leads were down by basically 20%. And so as we look at this, one of the key things we have to understand is what's driving that shift. So the first thing I like to do in that situation for the specific client was digging into the data. So the first thing to do is digging into GA4, understanding what are the pages that, in categorizing, we talked about before, categorizing the pages by the different types of the subdomains that are generating that volume, but in addition to that, each of the URLs that were in the page. So for example, local pages, and understanding how local pages were performing versus informational pages on products, versus pricing pages on products, versus content-focused content pieces, meaning blogs, resources, articles, those types of things, and categorizing and bucketing those into key core areas. Then understanding, okay, what's the traffic look like month over month, year over year, mobile versus desktop? So just doing it at a device level, right? Then you take your device level component and you go, how does that then ultimately take into database lead data? So I have typically had the access at organizations I've worked with, as well as in ones that I consult, to understand what's happening in their databases and running SQL queries to understand at a URL level for leads, how are they converting, right? And so then you do the match of, you do a lookup table of here's the URLs, here's the inbound traffic, and here are the leads that came from those specific URLs. And I take that and understand what was the trends, right? And so let's say in this situation, there was a significant decline in mobile leads that came from mobile leads. And most of those mobile leads that declined in mobile traffic was on form fields. And historically, inbound phone numbers had generated 400 calls a month, and they just disappeared. Right? And so you're going, okay, what happened in that situation? Traffic was flat, quote forms were down, and leads were significantly down from calls by 400. The next piece becomes, let's dig into that. It's just like an onion that you just start to peel, nice. Right? So the next piece becomes, all right, what happened to the forms? Why are our forms down? Did we make changes? It goes into the technical question. Do we make changes to the form? Did we add anything to the form? Do we potentially add a disclaimer to the form that happened to be, 2 paragraphs long and required someone to ensure that they checked a box before they completed a form? Did we add a field to the form that added friction, right? And what we recognized in all of that was we did add a disclaimer. We did run tests on those pages, and those tests actually did not fare well. And so that's why there was so much volatility during that time period. And then the question becomes, okay, well, what happened to the calls? Because 400 calls a month is a significant volume of calls. So then the next piece becomes, why did the calls decrease? So then I started to run an understanding of, okay, if I look at the phone data for these systems, was it the number of inbound calls that shifted? What phone numbers, right? You might use a tool like Invoca or a Ring Central, and you can understand where did those calls historically come from that now they're just gone.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found was we had a pop-up on the website, and the pop-up was removed because of user experience issues, right? Like from an SEO perspective, it actually wasn't great, right, to have a pop-up because you could be penalized from a rankings perspective to have this pop-up, but it was generating 400 calls a month. And so you're like, well, what's the business decision around driving that volume? And so we ultimately put the pop-up back up, put it on a delay so that it was lazy loaded, right? So that way it would be completely loaded and not impact the performance of the site. It was based on exit or a timed experience. And we immediately saw 400 calls come back, right?
Oh, we have thoughts.
Right? And so it just comes down to like dissecting at such a micro level view of why leads are down, even if traffic is flat to up. That requires us to be so investigative in that process. Like for me, I can go down this rabbit hole and spend tons of time in it to try to understand a user experience and ultimately walk away with it going, okay, what are the 3 to 5 things we need to do immediately to fix this leaky bucket that we're experiencing?
I love this example on so many levels. First one is back to your point around the importance of communicating, right, between departments, because, well, SEO, CRO, here I'm thinking user experience now, because, I mean, if I'm looking at this from a purely newbie and, like really straight away perspective, I'm like, we are removing the pop-up form and we are getting less form filled out. Like, what's happening, right? But then you're like, yeah, no, but there is a reason for that, right? The team probably wanted to do things right and be like, hey, we see that this affects SEO because our page loads slower, so we are losing like ranks on this. And from a user perspective, everybody complains about pop-up, whilst pop-up is the most effective way to capturing leads, but that's another topic. So like, hey, let's remove it. It's well-intentioned. We're optimizing the user experience so they build further trust with us and eventually they will end up in customers. But well, it's not as straightforward, right? So if you actually establish clear communications and like discussions between the different departments, you're like, hey guys, we're going to run this, just so you know, we are removing the form. And if you would have been informed in the first place, you're like, hey, wait a second, as of the moment you remove that form, our phone leads were down 400 per month. It's so interesting. But then you got to the bottom of it.
Yes. And I think the key that you talk about, to your point around the collaboration piece, right, is it's the collaboration between each of the players in a marketing department that are impacting the site. It's a collaboration between IT. If they do a production push and it happens to break something, for us to be super involved in a post QA process, right, is really key and important. And the last piece is making sure that we have a really good, strong relationship with sales and trying to make sure that we're being able to build bridges and to your point around building the credibility with the sales team is about ensuring that we can collaborate with each other to maximize the results of the business, because we all have one goal, right, at the end of the day in mind. And it comes down to being aware of what, each of the players are doing.
100%. So I think you already hinted on that, Laura. But so how do you typically run an effective test? And here maybe, so further down the investigating, understanding the problem, how do you then run tests that, I think you mentioned something around this, like, hey guys, I'm going to do this. It might affect the number of sales or qualitative leads, but it's just to try and push volume to see if that has an impact. Is that part of running an effective test? Again, back to that communication and being like, hey, we need to test some things, because if you don't learn, you don't grow. So it's like testing some stuff and then figuring out what doesn't work and then seeing, oh, hey, this kind of didn't work well, but there is maybe something here. Let's double down on this. Actually, I'm starting to answering my own question. But so back to you. How do you typically do that when it comes to SEO and CRO? And actually, let me give you a bit more flavor to this question, especially knowing that in SEO, it's not like you're going to do a change and you're going to see the effect right away, because it usually takes a few days, if not a few weeks, if not longer, to like have the real SEO effects, especially when it comes to organic. Back to you. How do you do that?
Yeah. So I'll probably look at it from two prongs. And so the first one is running the effective test really comes down to having a really good roadmap, right? And so understanding for your site, what is your roadmap for CRO? And itemizing each of the tests, categorizing what's the intention and the hypothesis of the test, right? What pages are required for you to make changes on the test as well. So looking at high impact but lower risk, medium to low risk pages to run on. And that really comes down to understanding what are the top pages on your site that are generating volume and conversions. And so, for example, on a homepage, you might be able to run a quick lead form test that will basically take 1 week to capture all the volume that you need to say it's statistically significant, right? But if you're running it on, say, location pages, highly fragmented pages that aren't getting as much traffic, and also they might be in disparate areas. Behaviors might be different in the Northeast than they might be in the South. That you have to understand the nuances of what those tests means. So it's being really thoughtful about where you run the tests and why you're running the tests. The next piece comes down to when you're building your roadmap is understanding, like we talked about, level of risk with building credibility. And so start with creating an A/B testing roadmap that has minimal areas of risk just to get your feet wet if you've never done an A/B test before. Meaning change a button color on a lower risk page. Maybe you don't do it on the home page. Maybe you do it on a pricing page. Pick a subset of pages, let's say 5 pages that you want to run a test on, and let it run, recognizing what you're going to have to get to statistical significance. That's really going to be key. The other area goes, when you're building this test, the fastest results tests that you can get are going to be in paid. Like paid landing pages are going to be the best place for you to be able to test something fast and dirty and being able to get the results that you need because you're driving volume to those pages. And you can split your URL test to understand what does that mean. So typically what I like to do is I like to start running, especially if it's a UI UX, even if it's a content change test, I like to run those first on paid, see how they do. Then I take and apply those and I apply them to the actual core pages on the website. And that becomes then a shift to an SEO test, right? Because it's going to take 3-6 months before you can start to see the results of what that page looks like. But the key for SEOs, as we all know, is it's about measurement. So being able to monitor, okay, did it move? Did it not move? I made this change on, January 2nd, and now it's July 3rd. What were the when did that change happen? Were there algorithm changes that could have potentially impacted it? What am I seeing in terms of benefit? So I think being able to have the data to understand that is really key and important. Those thoughtful tests all come down to making sure that you're measuring the data clearly. And so trying to ensure that you have a pre and a post is really key and critical. I can't tell you the number of times that I've had clients go, well, we're just going to launch an A/B test on a brand new program. And it's like, well, the problem with a brand new program is that it's not clean data. You don't have any pre-data, baseline data to know how it did in the first place. Because it could be messaging, it could be design, it could be a number of things. It has nothing to do with how your lead form was applied on that page because you have no pre-data. So starting with a foundation of benchmark data is really, really important as well.
100%. I love it, Laura. I mean, I'm gonna go one layer deeper because I just love this. What's a sufficient amount of test when it comes to volume? I love that you mentioned the SEA part of things, which is like it's much easier to test on that. But if I do a change, how much traffic should I send to that changed page, change form, change whatever, to be able to say, yeah, that's a conclusive test, like we can learn from it? Because I'm thinking of a lot of websites that are going to have like 2, 3, maybe 4,000 visits a month. I mean, unique visitors a month, which is enough for their industry and their business to make conversions and, have a profitable business. But then when it comes to testing, I mean, I partnered with an engineer, so I've eaten a lot of how to say this properly in a corporate way. A lot of, hey, but we need to test this with data. But then, what's a sufficient amount of data to send to this kind of test? Like, are we talking in dozens of thousands of users? Are we talking in hundreds of thousands of users? Back to your point of saying, but we don't have any original data to be able to base ourselves on. But then, what's a good set of data to say, hey, from this we can learn? Then we need to send that much traffic to be able to learn more. What are typical metrics that you have in mind when it comes to this?
Yeah, a lot of it comes down to what your conversion rates are. So it's tough because like if you get, let's say, you might get 2,000 visitors on your site or on that specific page, but it's converting at 200, right?
Yeah.
That's very different than if you're only converting at 2. And so it really depends on what your conversion rates are by page to be statistically significant, right? For us to be able to understand what the math looks like. I typically like to make sure, right, that from a volume perspective, I'm looking at least 5,000. From a traffic perspective to come in, I want to find pages that have enough volume traffic to where I can actually close out a test in a month. And typically what you'll see is a lot of these tools, Optimizely, VWO, other tools like that, will actually give you when you'll hit statistical significance. So it takes the guesswork out of it, and it will tell you when your study or when your experiment has hit statistical significance for you to call the results. And it'll declare whether it's a winner or not. So I think that's really key, is leveraging the tools. There's also a lot of calculators that you can use online that basically gives you, here's my A/B test, here's how much traffic I have, here's how many leads that I have on a baseline, how much do I need to make sure that I'm capturing to hit statistical significance. So that's really the key, is making sure that you're kind of backing into the math and making sure you're hitting the right volume to make it a clear winner. The other thing that I will do as well is, when you're running these types of tests, the key is you have statistical significance, you declare a winner. There are elements where, for me, I'm always like, well, that page might have been different. So I want to test it again on a different page before I make it a global change across the entire site, right? Mm-hmm. And so I have seen conflicting data in studies that I have run where the home page says one thing, but a pricing page says another. And that's because the intent of that user is different. It all goes back to customer journey, right? And so that means that it's okay for you to have a different CTA based on the page that you're actually landing on. You don't have to have it be a global change. Just make sure that it works for what that page and what the intention of that page is.
And that makes a lot of sense. Laura, is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have asked when it comes to SEO and CRO and how to make a beautiful marriage out of it?
I'm thinking, let's think. I think the biggest area of shift and change is how our SEOs and honestly digital marketers, how do we continue to be resilient to the ongoing changes that are happening from the platforms? Yeah. With the shift to a significant shift from an AI perspective and how searches are essentially going to be, from an AI results. Yeah. The algorithm changes that are happening from Google, the shift in video searches, specifically TikTok being a primary search engine for specific generations.
Yeah,
I think it's how do we be nimble as marketers? And I think the key that has always been interesting for me is like one of the quotes that I've always lived by is by Albert Einstein, and it is, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." And that's how I just focus everything, right? Which is like, I think why I got into digital marketing was because it's always changing. I can never be bored in this space. It's always shifting, but it can also be exhausting, right? And lead to burnout because things are always shifting and you're always on. And so it's about how can we be nimble, but take care of ourselves and make sure that we can shut it off, because our lives and our work are all intertwined. What we do for fun is on our phones, right? What we do for work is on our phones and our computers. Yeah. And it's about making sure that we're taking care of ourselves along this journey so that we can shut it down, put that phone or laptop away, take a holiday, and be able to come back refreshed and recharged, because the truth is this space is always going to be changing. We just have to make sure that we take care of ourselves so that we can be adaptable, nimble, and resilient in it.
Amen to that. Laura, thank you so much for coming on SEO Gurus.
Thank you for having me. Such a pleasure. Thanks.
Hey, thank you so much for making it to the end. For more content updates, visit our website at ghapodcast.com, and don't forget to connect with me on LinkedIn for more tips and insights on SEO. See you in the next episode.